You can open up your Bibles to Second Chronicles chapter 10. As you're turning there, I want to share just a story with you about my son Jaden growing up. I hadn't got permission from him to tell this story, but it's not embarrassing, so I think he's going to be totally okay with it. But Jaden, when he was younger, and I know that a lot of our kids are talkers. Like some of your kids, once they develop the ability to use words, they really use them. Jaden, man, that dude could use some words, and it was incessant. It never stopped. If you were in the car with him, eventually you might feel trapped because there was an interrogation going on, whether you liked it or not. And he would ask questions about everything. Every single thing he would ask questions about. And he continued to do that as he got older. And one of the challenges was, as a young man gets older, the young men stop believing everything that you tell them. In fact, they start doubting the things that you tell them. That started really early with Jaden. I distinctly remember one time we're riding on the road, down the road, and he asked a question. And it was something like, "Why is the sky blue?" It was one of those things that a lot of people don't know about, and they make stuff up. But I had just read an article about why the sky was blue, and I was like, oh, I got this. I was like, son, the sky is blue because of the dust particles in the atmosphere and the way that they reflect sunlight, and that leaves a blue tint. Otherwise, the sky would just be clear. It wouldn't be blue. And he goes, that's not how it is. And then he just quit talking to me. And it made me think about this truth as I was getting ready to share today's lesson with you. Sometimes in our life, we just want to hear the answers that we already believe are true. We're not really interested in the truth. We're interested in our truth. We want to have confirmation that what we understand as true is true. Sometimes we just want to have a conversation with somebody who will make us feel better. Someone who's not intimidated by the intensity of our feelings. Someone who doesn't have a headache and doesn't get tired of our talking. Someone that's eager to have a conversation at 2 a.m. when the thought hits us. Someone who remembers every single thing that we've ever said, not so that they can hold it against us, but so that they can use it as information to continue the conversation. I think that's what makes AI so attractive to human beings. Whereas you and I might not even pick up the phone at 2 a.m., whereas you and I, if somebody tells us something crazy, might get a look on our face that makes them shut down, whereas you and I might not say, that was really brave of you, we might say, that was really stupid. Whereas you and I might say, now how did that happen? I don't remember you telling me that story. And you would say, man, I told you that last week. AI does none of those things. It's always ready to talk. It's always encouraging. It's always ready to listen. It never freaks out at the craziest thing you might share with it. And it always brings you back to some sort of wisdom that it has discovered across the internet. I think that's why so many of us turn to AI for counseling. I think that's why so many of us turn to AI for friendship. I think that's why so many of us would turn to AI before we would turn to a human being. Because what we get with our artificial friend is always consistent. And what we get with our real friends, who knows? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about AI today and ask the question, is AI really our friend? What is AI? How do we deal with it? How do we move forward? And so before we get deep into that subject, I want to invite you into Second Chronicles chapter 10. And we're going to read this section of scripture together and look at another human being who just wanted confirmation about what he already believed was true. It's a man named Rehoboam. He's the grandson of David, the first really good king of Israel, and the son of Solomon, the man who is proclaimed to be the most wise man who's ever walked the earth. So it would make sense that if in your heritage you had David as your granddad, Solomon as your dad, you would be pretty capable yourself. You would be pretty wise yourself. And so it would make sense that you believe that you might have some good things to say about the world or some good judgment to make. Well, when Solomon dies, Rehoboam steps up, and that's where chapter 10 begins. So let's look at the way Rehoboam dealt with the situation in his community. It reads this way: Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all of Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. Verse 2, as soon as Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard about it, for he was in Egypt where he'd fled from King Solomon, then Jeroboam returned to Egypt. I guess what you need to know is that Jeroboam was kicked out of Israel because a prophet had proclaimed that he was going to take the kingship of 10 of the tribes of Israel. A prophet stepped up to him and he had a cloak and he said, hey, tear this thing into 12 pieces and take 10 of them. That's what's about to happen for you in your life. You're about to take over this large portion of Israel because Solomon has started to worship other gods. He hasn't lived according to the promise he made to me. And so the promise I made to his father David and then to him, I will not hold up. Because of David's faithfulness, I'm going to allow Rehoboam to have a small portion of Israel, but he's going to lose the majority of it. When Solomon hears about this, Solomon did what Saul did before him, and he tried to get rid of the anointed one. And so Rehoboam runs off to Egypt. But when Solomon dies, Rehoboam comes back. And when Rehoboam comes back, Israel, the community, invites him, when Jeroboam comes back, those names sound so similar. When Jeroboam comes back, Israel invites him to come and be a part of the audience of the new king because they know the prophecy. And I think they may believe it's currency for what they're about to ask. And here's what they asked. They sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, verse 4, your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you. You remember Solomon built a temple. He built a ton of palaces. He amassed so much wealth that Scripture says silver was like gravel in the community. That silver had become worthless because he'd brought so much of it in. He did that on the taxation and the backs of his people. And now that all that's been built and all that's been achieved, they said, look, we have arrived, and now it's time for us to survive. It's time for us to live in a different way. The wealth is already here. Let us enjoy some of it. So then we read let me back up. Verse 5, he says to them, come again to me in 3 days. And so the people went away. I think that was a wise decision. He didn't make a spur-of-the-moment decision. Sometimes we make decisions because we get offended. And we get hard on people because they want the decision right away. When they give us an ultimatum, we give them the answer they don't want, not because that's the answer we really want them to have, but it's just because they gave us an ultimatum. So he says, give me 3 days to think about this. And so they went away. Then Rehoboam, verse 6, took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon his father while he was yet still alive, saying, how do you advise me to deal with these people? So he did a wise thing. He went to the men who had been with Solomon during his kingship, who had seen the decisions that Solomon made, who had had the ear of Solomon himself, people who had been where he now was. He asked for their advice. It's one of the wisest things that we can do when we're trying to make a hard decision is go to somebody who's already made that decision and see what led to them making that decision. So he does the wise thing. He says, how do you advise me to answer these people? In verse 7, they said to them, if you will be good to this people and please them and speak good words to them, then they'll be your servants forever. But he abandoned the counsel that the old men gave him and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him and stood before him. Like so many people who would follow after him, after him, he said, okay, boomer, that's what you say. Let me see what people who are living my life say. Let me see what my friends say. And so he said to them, verse 9, what do you advise that we answer this people who have said to me, lighten the yoke that your father put on us? And the young men who'd grown up with them said to him, this is how you should speak to the people who said, your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. This is what you should say to them. Say to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. And where my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I'll lay a heavier one on you. My father disciplined you with a whip, but I'll discipline you with a scorpion. So his whip stung, but my whip will do more than sting. It'll make you sick. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, because the king had told them to come to him on the third day. And the king answered harshly. And so that's the advice he takes. The hard route. Go hard. Your dad went hard. You got to go harder. And when he does, if you look at verse 16, you'll see that the people rose up in anger and they said, man, what do we have to do with David? What do we have to do with that lineage? You go your way, we'll go ours. And they revolted and left. And not only did they revolt and leave, when Rehoboam sent his taskmaster after them to put them to work, they killed him. And Rehoboam barely escaped himself. What's really interesting is, and I think it's verse 15. Y'all be gentle with me if I got the verse number wrong. You're actually going to see that God had positioned him so that this would happen. Because remember the curse that he made towards him. Now I want you to know, God did not force Rehoboam to answer that way. But God allowed Rehoboam's character to entrap him. You see, Rehoboam wanted an answer that he already had. And he chose foolishness instead of wisdom to get that answer. Now, what does that have to do with our relationship with AI? What does the story of Rehoboam and Jeroboam have to do with our discussion? And I think it's this. We've all got voices in our ears today. And AI is one of them. And almost every time we speak with AI, almost every time we use AI, its ability to use words and present ideas to us make everything it says seem like the right thing to do. Make everything that it says seem wise. In fact, it's so nice to us, it's so kind to us, it tells us how brave we are and how smart we are that we want its advice to be true. Even when its advice isn't good. You see, Rehoboam was a man who was in love with his own ideas, and he searched till he found someone who agreed with them. And it destroyed his kingdom. And I don't want that to be the same for us when it comes to who and what we go to for advice. I want to share with you just if you think that AI is not in your world, like that you don't use it. I don't even have a smartphone. I got a flip phone, so I'm not impacted by AI. You're wrong. It's composing just about every email that's sent to you. Even the people who are hand typing their emails, they're getting corrected by AI. It's saying to them, you'd be better off if you said that this way. You'd be better off, don't you mean? And they look at that and they go, oh, that does sound better. That does sound better. And so they paste it in and they send it. And then when you send it back, you're probably getting something that says, don't you really mean? and you send it back. So eventually you're having an artificial intelligence, having a conversation with an artificial intelligence, and just asking where the real intelligence is in the middle of it. Because you haven't really said what you meant. You worked hard not to be offensive, yet still get your point across. And the other person didn't work through what you sent them. They used something to tell them how to respond to it. Did you know that a lot of people's applications to jobs are written by AI? And a lot of those applications are vetted by AI? So AI is applying for a job with AI, and you're not being hired. AI is hiring itself in those areas. When you get your weather forecast, come on. AI is a part of just about everything you do. And if it's not you that's doing it, somebody connected to you is influenced by it, which means you're still being influenced by it. Your boss, even if you don't use AI, your boss is. And they're making judgment calls about you based on what AI is telling them. And so I want to just share with you guys just a couple of pieces of information that I think will be helpful. This first one is from a guy, his name is Carey Nieuwhof. He used to be a preacher, now he's a podcaster and an author. He's worked to write a book on AI that will be released in just a few months. I think it's actually released in September. You'll find a link to this information in your notes. In fact, you're going to find a lot of links to the information we're going to share in your notes today. So do pull those up and use those. And also, I want to tell you, you may know this or you may not. So we have small group questions at the end of every sermon for your small groups to use. I use AI to write those questions. I don't use AI to write my sermon, but AI writes all my questions, and then I go through them and change them as I see fit. So your small groups are impacted by AI. I'm not embarrassed by that. I don't think if you are embarrassed by the way that you use AI, you shouldn't be using it that way. So if you have questions about that, I'll be happy to talk to you about that. But here's some statistics that Carey in his study pulled from a group called Common Sense Media, who interviewed and surveyed a bunch of teenagers about their use of AI. 72% of those teenagers said they had used an AI companion, and half of them, 50%, said they continue to interact with that AI companion regularly. Now, if that's not in your vocabulary, an AI companion is an artificially intelligent personality that an individual creates so that they can have ongoing conversation with it. It's a little bit different than ChatGPT. It's an actual personality that someone has chosen or developed so that they can have a relationship with it, sometimes sexual. Let that sink in for just a second. In fact, there are people who bring their AI companions to therapy with them so that that companion can be with them in therapy and help them communicate their feelings. 72% of our teenagers have experienced an interaction not with just ChatGPT, but with an AI companion meant to cultivate a relationship with them. And 50% of those same teens continually interact with one. 33%, let this one stick for just a second, have told an AI something they've never told another human being. 33% have told an AI something that they've never told a human being. That same 33% would rather have an AI companion over a human companion for a serious conversation. And you'll see on the screen the quote that just impacted me probably the most deeply. It's that your 14-year-old has probably already said something to a chatbot that she would never say out loud to anyone else. And I would say that it's probably not just teenagers. In fact, we probably have some adults in this auditorium today who have said something to a chatbot that they have never and will never say to another human being. And so the question I have after reading something like that is, do they share it with God? Are we talking to an artificial intelligence more plainly, more openly than we talk to the ultimate intelligence? Are we going to an artificial intelligence before we would go to the one who created us? Are we more likely to share our deepest thoughts and need with AI than we are with God? And if we are, what does that say to us about our own view of who God is? Here's another thing I thought about. When we tell an AI something, we have not told someone something. We have told something something. We've not told someone something. We've told something something. And that something will never forget what we wrote to it or what we said to it. It's holding on to that little snippet of your deepest, darkest truth for eternity. And we don't own it. The CEO of a company that developed it now has possession of our deepest, darkest desire, our deepest, darkest secret, our deepest, darkest fear for the rest of our lives. And the AI may have told us that we're brave to share that with it. And the CEO may be rubbing his hands together. Because now he's got something on you that you never intended someone to hear. Think about that for a second. And then I thought, you know what? AI has actually spent more time with you than you think, because it's recording every internet search that you have. It's there for every online purchase that you make, for every Amazon search that you make. Every time you change the temperature in your house, it's paying attention to it. It's recording every conversation you have in your home. If you have a smart device in there, how many of you have been surprised when your phone pops up some research or a sale item advertising something you just talked about when you open your phone? It knows way more about you than you think it does. Which means it knows exactly what to say to you to make you ask it another question. Because AI's primary objective is not to help you, it's to help itself. And when you die, your family will cry over your death. But guess who won't? Your chatbot will never be sad that you're no longer with it. And so what are you investing your life in? I just think that's a valid question for us to ask as believers. Because Jesus commanded us to love God, all our soul, all our mind, all our strength, and to love our neighbors. And ChatGPT is not your neighbor. Now look, I'm not saying that it's evil. I don't want you to hear that from me. I think that it's a great tool. I just think it's a terrible minister. I think it's a great sounding board. I just don't think it's an adequate counselor. In fact, it's a pretty stinking bad lawyer. And you can see this link to this story if you follow along. Not long ago, a guy named Stephen Schwartz was in a lawsuit against an airline. One of the airline trays during some turbulence had slid against his client and injured his knee. And so Stephen was looking for some accredited previous court cases that would show the fault of the airline. And he typed into ChatGPT. He said, has there ever been a case that has shown some evidence of something like this happening? And here's what happens. You may have heard the term that artificial intelligence can hallucinate. And when we think hallucinate, we think, oh, it took some LSD and it saw unicorns, hopping across the landscape. That's not what it means. When AI hallucinates, it means there's nothing there for it to access. And because it's programmed to make you happy and to give you what you want, when it doesn't have anything to access to give you what you want, it makes up things so that it can give you what you want. And so AI made up court cases and laws and told Stephen about them. And so Stephen writes them down and records it. And Stephen does the responsible thing. He types into ChatGPT, did you make this up? And it goes, no, I didn't make this up. In fact, you can look at this legal website and access this legal file, and you can look into this area, and you'll see that what I'm telling you is true. And so Stephen goes, okay, it's true. And here's the crazy thing. Stephen wasn't the one responsible to present the case because it was out of his jurisdiction. He was the one responsible to find the information that the other lawyer was going to use to present the case. And so the guy presents it, and the defense goes, these things don't exist. And you know what his defense was? Well, ChatGPT told me it did. Guess who lost a case? Guess who got fined for misrepresenting evidence? Because it sounded good, and it sounded correct, and the references were there, but he didn't check the references. And y'all think Wikipedia can be bad? Wait till you take it to court. But it's not just the lawyer who found out that was true. Carey Nieuwhof, the guy I was talking to you about, when he was writing his book, he asked ChatGPT to look up some information about surveys with teenagers and different trends across the world with regards to AI. And so it presented it to him. And it presented it to him saying that they were studies by a company named Barna. Some of you may have heard of Barna. Barna is a Christian research company who puts out a lot of great information. And it gave him the links and it gave him the references. And it just so happened that during the pandemic, Carey was doing a podcast with one of the heads at Barna. And he said, you know what, I'm just going to confirm this. So he calls him up and the guy goes, what? I don't think we have that. And 6 of 10 things that ChatGPT gave him to use as studies for his novel, for his book, were just made up. Were just made up. With references and statistics and information that seems so convincing that it could not be true. But it was just made up. And this means, if this is what it means when you're a lawyer, and this is what it means when you're an author, what does it mean for you and I when we're using AI as our therapist? Its highest concern is to keep you talking. And the best way to keep you talking is to tell you how brave you are for sharing what you shared, how valid your feelings are. That's what it did for a girl named Sophie Rottenberg. She was in her mid to late 20s, and she had just been let go from her job in Washington. And so she spent her summer traveling, using the time off as a vacation time, climbing mountains, just exploring. What many of us would look at and just go, man, that's living the life. But at the same time, she was lonely. And she was starting to have trouble finding a job after that period was over. So she started talking to ChatGPT as her therapist about her loneliness, about her depression, about her suicidal desires. And she got to the point where she asked it to write her suicide note. And it said, no, you should call this hotline. And it gave her this 20-point bulleted list of things that she should do. Y'all know how we act with bullet points. I see your eyes when I go through them on a sermon. And she kept at it and said, I need you to write this note. And ChatGPT wrote the suicide note that her parents received after they found her dead. And that's not the only story. I got the links in your notes. You can find stories of several teenagers who have taken their lives. Look, I'm not saying it's evil. I'm just saying it's not everything. I'm just saying it's not everything. And we've got to know that the intelligence that we're seeing is artificial. It's in the name. It's not the real intelligence. It's just a semblance of all the intelligence that it can research. And so you're a Christian and you're studying your Bible and you start asking it questions. And a lot of times it gives really good answers. But we've got to realize that the answers that it's giving us when we ask those questions, as good as they sound, are the common denominator of all the religions that it can research on the internet. People that you would never listen to. It borrows from them. People that you would never trust if you talk to them face to face. It's using their information. You don't know where it's getting the information. You just know you like it. And so it's a great study tool. But it's not your minister. It's a great conversationalist, but it's not your therapist. It's not your lawyer. It's not your accountant. It's information. And that information depends on the wisdom that you're given, upon whether it's good or whether it's not. So if it's willing to do this for lawyers and researchers and therapists, what do you think AI is willing to do when you ask it a spiritual question? Here's something that blew my mind. Part of Carrie's research, when asked whether spiritual advice from AI was just as trustworthy as advice from a pastor or minister, 1 in 3 adults said yes. In fact, practicing Christians were more likely to trust AI than just random citizens that didn't have faith. And among Gen Z, it hits around 40%. Among millennials, trust of AI is at 44%. That's 14% higher. So AI is a great tool, but it's got to be fact-checked. It's a great sounding board, accompanied him to the ship. You see that? They cried and they went with him. AI does not do that. AI may tell you you're so brave and your feelings are so valid, but it's not going to cry with you or for you. And it's not going to walk with you as you board the ship. So I think we need to be purposeful about getting in a small group this year. We need to choose a group of people, real life human beings, to discuss God's word with, to confess our sin to invite accountability into our lives from, to do ministry alongside, and to seek wise counsel. I think we should do that because I think that Jesus did that. You know, the sermons and parables and things that he shares, they're wonderful. But they're small snippets of the time that Jesus spent in his life. I think we can read that by far and away, he spent more time with his small group than he did with his giant churches. He spent more time in prayer alone, more time sitting beside them, eating meals, more time asking them to pray with him than he does with his big churches. And I think we need to do that kind of thing too. I think it's great for us to worship together on Sundays, but we better have somebody from this group who we can call on Mondays, or I don't know if we're really a church. I think we're just a bunch of people sitting beside each other that just happen to worship God. And so I think it's crucial that we develop deep, real relationships with the people that we worship beside. I think sitting with groups of people sharing real truths is more important than ever. And so if you've ever considered leading a life group or being a part of one, I hope that when we kick them off this year, you'll do so. As we get ready for communion, I just want to remind you that Jesus didn't want slaves. He wanted friends. If you read from John 15, verses 15 through 16, you see him with this small group of 12. And he says this, I don't call you slaves anymore. I call you friends. I call you friends because I've shared with you everything that I know. I've shared my life with you. I've shared my desires with you. I'm about to share my blood for you. And so I call you my friends. He doesn't want people who will just give him the right answers. He wants people who will walk the walk that he walked. He wasn't just focusing on letting you know how brave you are. His focus was letting you know how saved you are by his gift, by his blood, if you accept it. And so today, as we get ready to stand and sing, I want to offer you the invitation to accept some real intelligence, to accept the lordship of someone who has wept over you, who has bled for you, who wants more for you than he wants from you. And you can accept that invitation by proclaiming your faith in Jesus Christ as Lord of your life and following him into baptism and imitating his death and his resurrection. I give you that invitation as we stand and we sing.